The great ship Argo bobbed gently, her oaken hull creaking softly as she floated on the inky waters. The stars above shimmered coldly, their light barely touching the restless surface below. All around the night pressed in, thick and impenetrable, as if the world itself was holding its breath. On the dark waters of the Phasis River the Argo seemed both a sanctuary and a prison. The river's slow current carried the ship nowhere, and the mist that curled along the banks seemed to whisper of dangers lurking just out of sight. Jason and his brave Argonauts had returned from their tense meeting with King Aeetes of Colchis, but there were no cheers or songs of triumph to greet their return. Instead, the men gathered in uneasy silence, their faces drawn and eyes shadowed with worry. Instead, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating like the river fog that clung to the ship. Every breath felt weighted, every movement slow, as if the very atmosphere conspired to sap their courage. The king's challenge echoed in their minds, a task so impossible it seemed designed only for their failure and death. To yoke fire-breathing bulls, to sow a field with dragon's teeth, and to face the sleepless serpent that guarded the golden fleece. These were not trials for mortal men, but for gods or madmen. Jason, their leader, stared into the night, his handsome face etched with deep concern. The weight of his promise pressed down on him, heavier than any armor. He wondered if he had led his friends to glory or to doom. He had promised to bring back the golden fleece, to fulfill the prophecy and restore his honor, but the price was steeper than any of them had ever imagined. Each man on deck felt the sting of that promise, knowing that their fate was now bound to Jason's courage and to the whims of the gods. Peleus, the father of the great Achilles, spoke first, his voice rough with frustration and fear. "This is a trap," he growled, his eyes flashing in the torchlight. "Aeetes means for us to die here, far from home, our names lost to the darkness." Jason looked at the distant lights of the king's palace, a fortress of secrets and dark power. The golden glow seemed to mock their hopes, promising riches but hiding deadly intent. Somewhere within those walls, the golden fleece awaited, but so did treachery and despair. The silence returned, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the Argo. The men stood together, yet each felt alone with his fears. In that moment, the Argonauts understood that their greatest challenge was not the monsters or the magic that awaited them, but the shadow of doubt that threatened to unravel their resolve before the true test had even begun. As despair settled over the Argonauts, the weight of their impossible quest pressed down on every man aboard the Argo. The sea seemed endless, the sky a heavy shroud, and the promise of the golden fleece felt more distant than ever. Each man's thoughts turned inward, haunted by the dangers that awaited them in the land of Colchis, where King Aeetes ruled with an iron will and dark magic. The crew huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, wondering if they would ever see their homeland again. In that moment of gloom, Argos, the builder of their ship, and a man known for his quiet wisdom, stepped forward. His eyes, usually fixed on the timbers and sails, now shone with a spark of determination. Argos was not just a master shipwright, he was also a nephew to King Aeetes himself. This connection gave him a unique insight into the Colchian court, its secrets, and its dangers. He had grown up hearing stories of the king's cunning and the strange powers that lingered in the palace's shadowy halls. Gathering the crew around him, Argos spoke with a new urgency. "There is one person who might help us," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Her name is Medea, and she is a powerful sorceress." The men turned to listen, a spark of curiosity piercing their gloom. For the first time in days, a sliver of hope flickered among them, as if the very mention of Medea's name had shifted the air. Argos explained that Medea was no ordinary princess. She was a priestess of the goddess Hecate, trained in the ancient arts of magic and prophecy. Her rituals were said to call down the moon's power, and her knowledge of herbs and spells was unmatched in all of Colchis. "But she is not like her father," Argos insisted, sensing the crew's unease. "Medea has a kind and compassionate heart. She is known to help those in need, even when it puts her at risk. Her power was immense, perhaps even greater than the king's. Some whispered that she could command the very elements, and that her will was as unyielding as the tides." Stories spread among the people of Colchis about Medea's secret acts of kindness, healing the sick, protecting the innocent, and defying her father's cruelest orders when she could. To the oppressed, she was a silent guardian. To the powerful, a mystery. Jason looked at Argos, his mind racing. To trust the daughter of the man who wanted him dead was a leap of faith. yet the desperation of their situation left little room for doubt or hesitation. "Tell us more about her," Jason urged, his voice filled with a newfound intensity. The crew leaned in, hungry for any detail that might turn the tide in their favor. Argos recounted tales of Medea's wisdom and courage, how she had outwitted her father's enemies, and how her magic could bend fate itself. The men listened, their imaginations ignited by visions of a powerful ally who might just tip the scales. The heavy despair on the ship began to lift, replaced by the fragile, fluttering wings of a dangerous hope. For the first time the Argonauts dared to believe that their quest might not end in tragedy, but in triumph. If only they could win the trust of Medea, the sorceress who held their fate in her hands. Just as the debate about seeking Medea's help grew more intense, a sudden flutter of wings broke the stillness of the night. A pure white dove, pursued by a vicious hawk, flew in a panic straight towards the Argo. Just as the hawk was about to strike, the dove swerved and collapsed, falling directly into Jason's lap. Mopsus, the Argonaut's seer, stepped forward, his eyes wide with understanding. "This is a sign from the gods," he proclaimed. "The dove," Mopsus explained, "is a creature of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The hawk represents the dangers they face, the king's aggression." The sign was clear. They were meant to seek a peaceful, clever solution, not a bloody confrontation. The Argonauts felt a wave of relief wash over them, knowing their path led to Medea. While the Argonauts found new hope, their hearts buoyed by the promise of adventure and the distant glimmer of the golden fleece, a far darker mood settled over the palace of Colchis. The morning sun that brought hope to the Greeks cast only long, ominous shadows across the king's marble halls. King Aeetes sat on his throne, his face a mask of fury and suspicion, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and invasion. The arrival of the Argonauts was not a cause for celebration but a threat to his power and the sacred relic he guarded. He had never considered giving the golden fleece to these foreign adventurers. To him the fleece was more than a symbol of kingship. It was the very heart of his kingdom's strength, a treasure woven with the magic and history of Colchis. The thought of strangers laying claim to it filled him with rage. His challenge was a public execution disguised as a heroic trial. He would not simply refuse the Argonauts, instead, he would set them a task so deadly that none could hope to survive. The people would see justice, and the king would be rid of his enemies without staining his own hands. He summoned his most trusted advisors and the elders of Colchis to his great hall. The air was thick with tension as the king's inner circle gathered, each man aware that the fate of their land might soon be decided by the actions of desperate foreigners. "These Greeks are liars and pirates," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He accused the Argonauts of plotting to steal not just the fleece, but the very soul of Colchis. His words stoked the fears of his council, painting the newcomers as cunning invaders rather than noble heroes. He commanded his people to be vigilant and treat the Argonauts as the plague. Guards were doubled at every gate, and whispers of suspicion spread through the city like wildfire. The king's paranoia infected the hearts of his subjects, turning neighbor against neighbor and stranger into enemy. The king's plan was simple and brutal. Let Jason attempt the impossible task and then attack the Argonauts. He would use their courage against them, luring them into a trap from which there could be no escape. Soldiers were ordered to prepare for battle, and secret messengers were sent to loyal captains throughout the land. His advisors and soldiers listened, their faces grim, promising to follow his orders without question. Some felt a flicker of doubt, but none dared speak against the king's will. The fate of Colchis, and perhaps the world beyond, now rested on the edge of a knife. The stage was being set for a terrible conflict, with the fate of Jason and his crew hanging in the balance. As night fell, the palace bristled with tension, and the Argonauts unknowingly sailed toward a destiny shaped by the king's treacherous heart. Far from the king's council, Princess Medea could not sleep. The image of the handsome hero Jason was burned into her mind. She was torn between her duty to her father and this powerful, overwhelming new feeling for the stranger from Greece. She knew her father's cruelty and the trial he had set for Jason was impossible. Her own nephews, rescued by Jason, were on the Argo. Rising from her bed, Medea paced her room, her mind a battlefield. She possessed knowledge that could easily overcome her father's challenge. As dawn approached, Medea made a decision. Her love for Jason and her desire to protect her family had won. She would defy her father and help the hero. The decision to help Jason brought Medea a sense of purpose. She went to her sister Chalciope, whose sons were on the Argo. Medea confessed her feelings for Jason and her plan to help him. Chalciope readily agreed to help, sending a message to Jason. Jason and his companions followed the servant's directions to the temple of Hecate. Medea was waiting, dressed in shimmering silver robes, her dark hair flowing around her shoulders. She explained exactly what Jason must do to survive. "I will give you a magical ointment," she said, holding out a small jar. "For one day, it will make you invincible." Jason listened, captivated by Medea's words. Her knowledge was astounding, her instructions clear. He took the jar from her hands, a spark passing between them. "Medea," he said, "I do not know how I can ever repay you." He felt compelled to offer her a promise. "If I succeed, I will take you with me, back to my home in Iolcus." Medea's heart soared. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The promise was sealed, their destinies woven together by magic and love. The fate of the hero and the sorceress were now one. Jason's promise hung in the sacred air of the grove. He was no longer just fighting for a golden prize, he was fighting for Medea. "I will do exactly as you have instructed," Jason vowed. Medea felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had placed her faith in this hero, and his earnest vow reassured her. Her magic and his courage would be an unstoppable combination. "You must go now," Medea whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. Their meeting had been brief, but it had changed everything. It was a turning point, powered by magic and sealed with a promise of love. With a final meaningful look, Jason and Medea parted ways. Jason returned to the ship a changed man, his spirits renewed. He gathered his men and told them he now had a plan. As Jason prepared for the trial, the Argonauts readied the ship. The story of their success was yet to be written, but the foundation had been laid. It was a testament to the idea that courage is not always about wielding a sword. The magic Medea offered was powerful, but the true miracle was her bravery. As the day of the trial dawned, a sense of destiny hung over the land of Colchis. The stage was set for an epic confrontation, a tale that would be told for generations to come.